Greetings. My name is Peter Young, and I want to welcome all of you to this 21st Committee 100 Asian American Career Ceilings webcast. I'm very excited about today's topic and the panelists because I think it's a very important set of issues, and we have a wonderful panel with us this evening. Before I welcome them and introduce them, I just want to say that this program started by the Committee 100 almost 3 years ago, and because we felt there was a real need to collaborate and help publicize the issues, but also act as kind of a convening entity, and to help other groups that have been working very hard on these issues to work together and to share things and so forth. So, and that has been very, I think we've achieved that goal. And our speakers and panelists have varied. We have researchers who've done research on the issue of Asian American career ceilings. We've had leading people in different professions talk about their experiences. And we even had, in one case, kind of a town hall. We got everyone to try to contribute ideas on how we could do better to try to solve this problem. Before I go forward, I just want to mention the next one is on November 1st. And we are going to have Andrew Yang will do a fireside chat on Asian Americans in politics and in running for office. What are the obstacles and challenges? So that's going to be November 1st at 8 o'clock. So you'll get an invitation sent to all of you in about a week or so. So with that, I want to just say, first of all, I'm just going to ask each of the panelists to take 2 or 3 minutes and really tell you what they do and a little bit about background. But we have really here John Chiang, who's the former California State Treasurer and a Committee 100 member. We have David Chiu, who is the San Francisco City Attorney and the former California API Legislative Caucus Chair. We have Madeline Mielke, who is the President and CEO of Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies. And then we have Maeley, who is a former Chief Administrative Officer of the California State Assembly and a Committee 100 member. But what's very nice about this group is it's very diverse with different experiences and different areas of expertise, which is really what we aim to do. So let's start. And if I can just ask each of you to take just 2 or 3 minutes and really describe what you do currently and sort of briefly the career path that's taken to you where you are. So in alphabetical order, we'll start with John Chiang. By alphabetical, by last name.
Well, thank you, Peter. It's a delight to be with all of you. Thank you for moderating this panel. Thank you for Maeley for conceiving the panel. It's great to be with Madeline and David in addition. I used to tell this story in public office. I'm the oldest child of immigrant parents, right? So I went and saw the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia. I'm a resident of California, but happened to be back there. And so I'm proud of being American, but I think the story that's been demonstrated by those on this panel and so many others, I was listening to Chloe Kim, the Olympic gold medalist earlier today at the CARE function, is that Asian Americans, by and large, have had to struggle to prove who we are. And my parents came to this country with not much. They came separately. My dad, 3 shirts, 2 pairs of pants, to pay, learned his 5th language to pay for his PhD in his 5th language. My mom scrubbed floors at a college in South Dakota to learn her English lessons. So I'm a product of their struggle and their dream. And when I started to see, I was born in 1962. In 1960, the census had about 0.2% of the population in America was Asians. And we felt that hardship, that discrimination, so I was interested in law principally. At the beginning, I wanted to be a civil rights attorney. Went to law school, but ended up a tax attorney. But I had the good fortune of working for some great public servants, came out here, worked for the Internal Revenue Service, but then went to work for some elected officials, volunteered for a whole bunch of organizations, both Asian-based and non-Asian based, and tried to build a better future. Left office in early 2019, and today I serve on public boards. it was a dream I long had. I want to give great kudos to Maeley Tom. Maeley was my deputy for CalPERS and CalSTRS. I strongly believe Asian Americans, along with everybody else in America, needs to be part of the public and private sector governance. We don't have enough Asian American leaders along with others in the private sector leadership. So Maeley came to me with an idea in 2007, my first year as controller. And I led the effort at CalPERS and CalSTRS, and frankly, we were the first in the nation among public institutional investors to get more people who from diverse communities on public boards. And so that's what I do today, because I want to make sure that the issues that not only public officials are addressing, we need private sector leadership to stand up to build a more equitable and stronger society.
Well, John, sounds like you've had a varied career, and you prove that you can be a tax expert and still actually be a useful citizen, right? So, David, you're next. 2 or 3 minutes, just what you do today, but so how you got there.
Thank you, and don't knock the tax experts; they control all the money. So first of all, a good evening, everyone. It's thank you for being part of this gathering, and just appreciate the leadership of C100 and everyone on this call. So John and I have some similar backgrounds. I am also the first kid in my family born in the United States. And my guess is, like most Asian American electeds, when I was growing up, I never thought I would become a lawyer. I never thought I would become an elected official, in part because my family, we knew no lawyers or elected officials. I was supposed to be what my parents dreamed for me to be, which is the stereotypical doctor. Went to college thinking I would do that. And in the middle of my freshman year, there was an anti-Asian hate incident where 8 Asian American students at a nearby university were attacked in the middle of the night by white college football players at their school. And what was horrifying about that experience wasn't just the fact that they were attacked, but that they were never brought to justice. And I was called, along with other Asian American students in the area, to show up and protest. And that was really my first foray into what then became college activism, which then inspired me to study the civil rights movement, which is why I went to law school, why I ended up working for a few years in Washington, D.C. for the Senate Judiciary Committee. But then I moved to San Francisco and never thought I would run for office. Spent time as a criminal prosecutor and a civil rights attorney, spent a decade running a public affairs technology company. When in 2008, a bunch of folks said, hey, San Francisco's Chinatown has never been represented by someone who looks like us, and encouraged me to run. I ran to be the first Asian American to represent the oldest Chinatown in the United States in San Francisco, became the president of the board, then ran for the state legislature for a seat representing Eastern San Francisco, again, never represented by someone from our community. And with the support of Maeley and John and others, we have built in California a pretty decent pipeline of Asian American elected officials. I served for 7 years in the state legislature, most recently as the chair of the API caucus. And then about a year ago, I became the city attorney of San Francisco, which we have about 300 legal professionals. We manage about 4,000 plus lawsuits a year, have about 100 clients from the mayor and our city council to all of the city agencies and departments that we have. And again, like many of us in Asian American roles, I'm the first person of our heritage sort of in this seat. And looking forward to the conversation we're going to have. But really just appreciate Peter and Maeley for suggesting this, because we have to build pipeline in every city and state in the country. And I'm hoping that this conversation can be part of that growth. And
I'm hoping today that, California has been a leader in this area for Asian Americans anyway. So I think out of this session, we're going to say what are some of the lessons that could be applied throughout the country. And by the way, David, you clearly have the most impressive background because you have some very impressive books behind you. The rest of us don't have anything other than pictures and flowers. So you're clearly the most serious of the 5 of us.
In politics, it's all about appearance, but I can promise you, I haven't read almost any of these.
That's all right. But are they real books or they're fake?
They're real.
Oh, they're real.
But the lawyers don't read these books. They read them online now.
Oh, I see. Okay. Madeline, you're next.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Maeley, for the kind invitation to join everyone today. And I'm Madeline Milka. I'm the president and CEO of APAICS, the Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies. For those of you who do not know about APAICS, we were founded in 1994 by former Secretary Norman Y. Mineta, along with his colleague, former delegate Bob Underwood. And at the same time, he also founded the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, in which we serve as a function of its foundation. In the Congress, there are tri-caucus. It's the tri-caucus of the Asian Americans, the Blacks, and the Hispanic community. And so my counterparts are the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute and the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. So the work that we do is to increase Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander representation throughout the electoral process, from community advocate to elected leader. And in our role at APAICS, we work to do that by providing paid congressional internships and paid fellowships, in primarily the KPAC offices, but also throughout Congress, to members who are not of the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander community, but who have strong constituencies in their districts from our community. My personal story is that I was born in Vietnam. My mother is Vietnamese. My father is German American. So my last name is German. That is not my married name. It's my maiden name. And so most people don't realize that I'm half white and also half Vietnamese, and not born in the US, but however, a US citizen when I was born. And so coming to this country, we're one of the last Americans to come to the US after leaving Vietnam in '76. My trajectory is one of having a very involved childhood, of having parents always talking to me about current affairs, politics. And so I went to a science and tech high school, but I was also the president of the student body. So my trajectory of being in public service or working in student government has always been a part of my linear, however, not straight, trajectory in this role of, encouraging people to enter public service or politics. I was also vice president of my student body in college. And so the idea that Asian Americans, working in politics, in public administration, in the field of public service should be a common piece of everyday life. It should not be unusual for anyone outside of our constituency to question whether or not we are a part of a public policy discussion, because public policy touches all of our lives, and we are all part of public policy. So having a robust public policy conversation involves all of us being active citizens. Being a part of boards and commissions is something that former Secretary also Mineta encouraged for all of us, even if you didn't want to run for public office itself, an elected office. So the ability for any Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander to feel that they are empowered to run is really an education of their own vision of leadership and the vision of leadership of everyone else in this country, because it should not be uncommon to see any of us in any sort of public facing role when it comes to discussing public policy that touches all of our lives.
Yeah, and we'll talk further about it, but obviously part of it is education, but part of it is there's a tendency of Asian Americans not to want to run for office for a variety of reasons. So we'll touch on that when we get to that topic. Maeley, your background in 2 to 3 minutes.
Well, as a senior person among all of these dear friends of mine who are as dedicated to the empower of Asian Pacific Americans, and I'm so glad to have them on this panel with us, and Peter, for you having that concept to have this panel. I'm the 20-year career professional veteran out of the California State Legislature, which really gave me a career that enabled me to ascend into top executive managements over both houses of at the Capitol. And it also gave me the opportunity to use my influence as a political capital insider to help my own community, because the small cadre of Asian staffers that we could count on one hand in the Capitol at that time, we were appalled. We were appalled because here we were at the seat of power, and our own community was never mentioned in terms of being a part of the ethnic minority groups. So we used that opportunity to try to help educate, try to engage, try to recruit staff to the Capitol, and even more, try to encourage candidates to run for office, because we saw that we needed Asian faces to create a presence. A way that we were able, and I'm talking about, I give credit to this cadre of staffers that I worked with. I didn't do this alone. A way that we did that is we actually reached out to the different Asian sub-ethnic community groups and told them, we need to combine and work as one. We need to speak with one voice, and thus the creation of the title APIA, Asian Pacific Americans versus Chinese, Japanese, South Asians in their separate groups. So that really helped us. During my time in the legislature, I also had the opportunity to direct the Senate Office of Asian Pacific Affairs, which was created because there were actually years where there was no Asian representation in the state capitol. So this office served as the voice of the APA constituency of California. Once new Asian legislators were elected, then of course we were able to terminate the office, much to my really joy, because we needed legislators there. I graduated into national politics, actually thanks to introduction of Ginger Liu, and subsequently had the opportunity to serve as advisor to about API issues to 3 presidential campaigns, and actually here in California to 4 gubernatorial campaigns. I think that it is so important that we have panels like this, because I find that even after, yes, 50 years in politics, we're still struggling with the same challenges that I was trying to address 50 years ago. And unfortunately, you know, we are still trying to prove we belong here. We're still trying to prove that we are not foreigners. We're still trying to prove that we have the talents and skills to help lead at all levels of the public and private sector, financial institutions. And that's why I believe these panels are so important. And I'm excited to participate with my fellow colleagues to address those issues.
Okay. So what we're going to do is there are 3 categories. You know, the overall title is, what can the AAPI community learn from other ethnic communities? And we have sort of 3 headlines: career ceilings, political clout, and fight against discrimination. So let's take them one by one. So if we start with the career paths and politics, you know, Asian Americans are underrepresented in a wide variety of political arenas. And although there have been some steps forward, you know, for example, the mayor of Boston is Asian American. It's also true that even if you look at the cabinet or the Senate or Congress, we're just really not well represented in numbers. So really a question to any one of you is, as you look at your own careers, and all of you have been through some version of sort of a political careers, what do you, when you reflect on the successes and failures of the careers of Asian Americans in the political arena, how serious do you think this career ceilings issue is? And do you think it is different if you look at the federal or the state or the local levels? Because there could be differences, right? So we'll start that is, the question is, how big a problem is it? And anyone can comment.
I'm going to kick it off and have the rest of the panel follow up on this statistic alone. In California, APIA represents 16% of the population, but now only 4%, we only have 4% of representation in the California legislature. If we were to have equivalent representation of our demographic numbers, we should have 32 state legislators in California.
So you're definitely severe in your opinion, right? John, David, or Madeline, any comments on it's? We'll talk later about why, but how severe do you see it, and does it seem to vary according to what level of government?
On the federal side, you know, we only have 3% representation, which is not in the proportion of our population of this country. So but we also have a record number of Asian Americans elected to Congress this year at 21, which is the highest number we've ever had in the Congress. And so each Congress has had an increase in the size of the number of Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander electeds. Right now, we currently have a Native Hawaiian in office, along with a Native Alaskan and a Native Americans. And so it's the first time all three of the indigenous have been elected. And so it's a shame that it's happening in 2022 in such a late time. And yet we also see some progress.
John, David, any comments about severity?
I think how I might answer the question is the numbers aren't great, but compared to where the numbers were 10 or 15 years ago, we've made a lot of strides. So if you look at the paucity of Asian American electeds just a decade ago, 15 years ago, when some of us were just getting started, they were abysmal. And I would say now the numbers aren't great, but they're on a not a bad trajectory. I was, you mentioned the mayor of Boston, Michelle Wu, who's a friend. And when I was growing up in Boston and when I was in law school in Boston, I could never imagine a prominent Asian American elected because the city, frankly, was so racist. The state was not, despite its liberal politics, was not as supportive as it could be of diversity. And to see her get elected in recent years is just remarkable. And I think we have seen electoral successes all the way up to the Vice President of the United States, who I'm proud to say comes out of San Francisco of API heritage. Those are positive data points, but the raw data is not great.
John, you're muted. You need to unmute yourself.
The numbers are simply put, they're horrible. But along David's line, I remember in 1997 when I was in office, the Democratic caucus was Assemblymember Mike Honda and myself on the Board of Equalization, and on the Republican side it was Matt Fong. And now Takasugi, who was a Republican Assembly member out of Ventura County. And so we worked really hard to try to build a political infrastructure, right? What you need money, mechanics, message. We didn't have a lot of Asians on the campaign side, good people like Maeley, who were providing extraordinary leadership inside the building, were volunteering externally. When we were trying to push upon the institutions that be, such as on my side, the California Democratic Party said, hire Asian staff. They said, we'll hire Asian staff. John, you and Mike can do the fundraising to hire staff. They didn't ask the other caucuses to raise money to hire people from the various ethnic community or the women's community, right? So they put an additional onus. So we've made great progress. Part of it is what you're doing now. I spent 40 minutes with Michelle Wu going through my fundraising database to help her get larger, financial contributors from California. My former staff person, campaign staff person, ran the independent expenditure from California in Boston to help get her elected, and asked, we went to my fundraising base to raise some of that money, as part of a base. So we just need to continue to do more of that, but it's not going to be easy.
When we've had these events and webcasts, and we've gone through different issues, different professions, so forth, the one striking thing is that some of the barriers are societal, whether racism or otherwise, but some of them are actually self-imposed as well, right? As a number of you mentioned, well, your parents said you got to be a doctor or scientist, and none of them ever say you ought to go to law school, right, David, right? So question is this: as you sort through what are some of the barriers, mention the 2 or 3 that you think are societal, right, or systemic, but also do you feel that there are some that are self-imposed, right, or self-created barriers? And any of you can answer this question in any order.
I would say with the work that we do in research. We work with such organizations like the Bartley Family Foundation, where they look to increase more women representation. And so we partner with them on the Asian American aspect. That women representation is generally looked at as in executive leadership, so governors, mayors, and heads of city councils. And so what we look at is societal views of what they see as an Asian American candidate, if they think an Asian American candidate is viable, a woman candidate. And so the things that we've learned in this research is that you can be a 50-year-old Asian American woman with no prior previous public service experience, never held an office before. But if you've been a community advocate, if you've been someone who has created public-private partnerships, someone who has created economic opportunities, then you have the viable credentials to be seen as a candidate to run for governor and win. And so regardless of party. And so this is something that, in terms of information that I share with the people who participate in the APAICS programs and the leadership programs that we run to encourage more people to run for office, those are the societal barriers that you think, are imposed on you, when there are really no barriers posed on you in that sense. And so the idea that we self-impose is definitely visible to a lot of our community. And again, it goes back to the definition of who you think is a leader. But there's systemic barriers. There's a lot of challenges in running for state legislative offices when you have state legislatures like in Nevada, where they only have a 120-day session every other year and only pay you for 60 days. And so if you are a working mom, how are you supposed to take care of your family or do all of your other family obligations, and you're not allowed to work anywhere else during that 120-day session? And so state legislatures themselves have placed barriers because you're looking for a certain type of person who can then work as a state legislator. So there's systemic barriers placed upon institutions, plus the actual, needs that you have to have when you run for office.
Yeah, and let's face it, generation by generation, also there are differences. And certainly my parents, their generation, they just the general feeling was politics was not a good thing, right? And so my sisters and I, we would secretly run for for student offices, and then declare a fait accompli, and then hope that they wouldn't get too mad. But I think each generation has also been different. But it is probably true that there's been somewhat of a negative bias in older generations communicated to their kids about whether politics is a great place to be. Anyone else on this thing about what the barriers are, either self-imposed or systemic or societal?
John, when I was going out trying to recruit candidates to run for office, I found 3 factors that made Asian candidates hesitant to run. 1, we have the syndrome of losing face, that our parents teach us, whatever you do, don't embarrass the family and don't lose face. And when you run for office, there's a 50-50 chance that you're going to win or lose. And a lot of the candidates, that's a risk-taking factor. Are you going to win or are you going to lose? And sometimes to lose in our culture is losing face. Mm-hmm. And I found that impacted a lot of candidates' attitudes. Secondly, I found that you hit the point. It's not the most prestigious profession where you're encouraged to go into politics. John has a funny story about here he's state treasurer, but his brother's a doctor. So his brother gets introduced before John gets introduced as state treasurer because his mom is so happy his brother's a doctor. But
if they only knew that he knew taxes, they would have changed.
Right, totally. Right? I mean, they're so prestigious. So the lack of prestige of going into politics. And third, I will tell you, it's very hard for Asian candidates to want to have to ask people for money, yes. Especially if they think that there's a chance they're going to lose. And now they've asked friends and families to invest in them. There's a lot of that I think is within their culture to make them hesitant to run.
So maybe how do those are three very interesting points. And what do we need to do to change that perception? Because those are really, they sound right, but also they're serious, self-created, obstacles to being successful politically.
I think part of what we need to do is build a pipeline of mentors and folks who can create the environment within our community that it's okay to run for office and sort of show folks what the ropes are. I have to credit Maeley, Tom, for who's referred to in our state as the Asian American godmother of our political community, because she really led the way for so many of us and trained so many folks to sort of move forward. I would also, though, add, and we haven't talked about an obvious issue that is not within our control, which are stereotypes, racial stereotypes. And the fact is, people look at our faces and they don't necessarily assume that we are leaders. People look at our faces, see foreigner, don't necessarily see executive, don't necessarily see speech maker, boss, decision maker sitting at the table. And those are things that are outside of our control. But what is within our control is to figure out sort of a structure and a pipeline. I was also going to mention one self-inflicted wound is our community doesn't always coalesce easily. And, I can certainly tell you in San Francisco for years, it's been difficult to elect Asian Americans because we have so many factions, whether it be factions of API ethnicities or political ideology or the challenges of sort of pulling together a joint agenda. That has often made it hard to move things forward. But I do want to answer, directly your question about how do we overcome some of this stuff around how do you raise money and how do you get the next generation of Asian kids to think about public office and public service. And a lot of that has to do with role models and there being folks in front of you who've done it before, who can turn around and say, I've raised money. It's not terrible. Here's how you do it. Because, like John, I'm sure we all had to kind of carve out our own fundraising network. And one of the things that I've been talking about with my fellow API electeds around the country is we've all created our own Asian donor networks. And we're always trying to build the wheel from scratch. And we've got to be smarter about how we share our networks and be able to support each other.
So let me address a few of those issues. If you want to change future generations, you need people to start winning, right? My 7-year-old godson, wants to be an elected official because he used to see me on stage. And so despite, his tender age, he thought it was different that an Asian American could hold public office. In regards to the comments that David made, I just want to underscore the validity of those. So for instance, Jerry Brown came into office for his third term and his polling numbers were really high after a year because if you looked at the electorate, they thought, he was doing, his strongest quality was providing financial leadership. When they polled that for me, right, my numbers on financial matters were off the charts. But then they also, when we did polling among different groups, I had established that I was a Californian, I was an American. Right, it was until we started polling some of the different ethnicities, some of the other communities were sensitive. Was an Asian American sensitive to immigration issues, right? And not until they heard in debates that my parents were immigrants and the struggle did the numbers start to turn. So you have to do that extra step to explain who you are, that you have the sensitivities, proclivities, and beliefs and value set of Americans. So that's the additional challenge. And then David pointed out the fundraising. I give huge kudos to Judy Chiu. Judy Chiu and I opened our fundraising bases, right? If you look at Mike Fong's base, if you look at a lot, Evan Lowe's Southern California base, right? Those are people that we built over a 30-year period of time, the relationships. Some of those contributors, one of my 5 largest contributors didn't contribute to me for 15 years. I worked on that person for 15 years and then became a larger contributor, right? That group is a larger contributor to other Democratic candidates today. So that's something that we're going to have, we just have to keep building that foundation. And then, we're talking about this generation. I see Lily Lee Chen as this Zoom, right? Lily was the first Chinese American female, a fellow Committee of 100 member, right? So she was doing this, way before I did. So she had to face that hostility, and so I just wanted to highlight Lily Lee Chen and her accomplishments in the history of Chinese Americans ascending and making contributions in the public sector.
By the way, she's in the audience, so she's hearing what you have to say. By the way, John, it's interesting to all of you. We've had now this is the 21st webcast, and two of the previous ones, we had Gary Locke talk about his career and first, running for governor and so forth. We had Alan Fong, who was the mayor of Cranston, Rhode Island. We had William Tong, they were together. But the one thing that all three of them said, and this is a very interesting point relevant to, John, what you were saying, which was they realized that they were never going to win by saying, vote for me because I'm Asian American. All of them said, vote for me because the things I care about and the things I represent and that you care about are the same, and family, I want to have a good, and it was very interesting. And so actually, all of them said that. They said that because they said, unless you're in Hawaii where, 40% of the population is Asian American, you're not going to win by saying, you're Asian American, vote for me. So that was an interesting, point. The other, David, you made a good point about this issue of Asian Americans not really coalescing as a group, right? And so I think one question I have for you is comparing, and obviously if you compare it to the Jewish American community, the Latinos, the African Americans, at least my perception is that they're more cohesive and they do better as a group, right? In terms of coalescing and promoting, their political causes and their political clout. Would anyone like to comment? And actually, the nice thing about this group is all four of you have different connections to those different ethnic groups in different ways. So you can comment, from your knowledge. Anyone like to comment?
Yeah, let me respond with 2 points. The first point, Peter, you said earlier on what other groups do that, we don't do. What we can do better than others, and I thought we had a massive missed opportunity with all the hate crime against Asians, and then some of our larger contributors, prominent individuals from the business community, from the entertainment community. What people really haven't done very well is the data analytics and communication studies. What moves Americans to be sensitive about the discrimination against Asians, right? And then what specific message for specific communities actually work. So we were throwing money, and like any other community, you have factions, people are protecting their territories, protecting those programs. One of the things that we could have done far more effectively is bring everybody together and let's say, hey, let's agree to this. Let's look at specific messages. What works, down in the South amongst, a certain demographic? What works? A lot of those commercials I was watching, they were moving to me, right? I would shed a tear, but then you could tell that message was directed to an Asian. It's like, you already won me over, right? I dedicated my career to try to fight against this discrimination. What I'm concerned about is what about my former best friend from junior high school who's a racist against, we're no longer friends, right? After high school reunions, but because his attitudes toward Latinos and Blacks are no longer acceptable. What do we do to try to fashion change, and how do we do that most effectively? So that's one of the opportunities I think that we should think about going forward.
Any other panelists on other ethnic groups? What are they doing that we're not doing, and what can we learn from them?
When I was in the legislature, there were very few role models. I want to give a shout out to Lily Lee Chen. I'm glad she's here because when we started, she was there for us. I only wish she was in the legislature, because if we needed help or we needed access and influence to community groups, Lily was there. And so she was a role model as a local elected official, and shout out to Lily. My mentors in the Capitol were not Asians because there were hardly any Asian role models there. So I became very close to the Blacks, to African Americans, and to Latinos. But one thing I found out about African Americans, that they have a bravado about them because they have a longer history fighting the civil rights revolution, and they developed political clout, and they developed role models that they could follow, the Martin Luther King, Jesse Jackson, Ellen Sharpton, and they had the organization of NAACP. So they were ahead of the curve. But I also found that because of their success in civil rights movement, they have mastered the art of how to be bold and how to be demanding. Here's an interesting poll about African Americans. According to the UCLA poll, they have the strongest view of racial identity. There's a strong connection with their race in all that they do. In fact, that's why they vote 90% Democrat, because they vote as a unit because of their racial identity. Latinos have 58% racial identity, Asians 40%, and whites 30%. So you could see how unified African Americans are because of their strong racial identity. Secondly, I found that they dominate in terms of having role models in the field of entertainment, sports, and media. And so when they talk, people listen because they have the public mass looking up at these African American role models in fields that are so appealing to the mass public. So they have that going for them. And I will tell you, when it comes to diversity, the first group that corporates or anybody else looks at to have inclusion, it will be the African Americans who get the appointments.
That's probably correct, right? And so they actually punch above their weight, right? As the first saying goes. So, and obviously Asian Americans, we're punching below our weight, right? Relative to what our real clout is. Madeline, do you have any comments along, what can we learn from other ethnic groups, or David?
Madeline, do you want to?
No, you go ahead.
So I have a couple of thoughts just here in this conversation. The one thing I will say that is an often, I think, blamed excuse for why we're fragmented is this idea that somehow we are pretty ideologically split, right? We've got Asian Democrats and Republicans, and maybe we don't always coalesce. But I would point out that I think, particularly within the Latino community, within the Jewish community, they're very ideologically diverse, but they have managed to figure out how to push up their own. And I think there are two things that Maeley alluded to or that are relevant. One, leaders across different sectors lift each other up, I think, way more than we do in our API community, right? So C100, I think, is an exception to that. But if you look at the leadership from the healthcare field, the corporate world, journalism, entertainment, what I see is a lot of fragmentation within our community. We are not trying to help each other across sectors in the way that we could. And that certainly inures to the benefit of those of us in Asian politics. But I would even say, we got to figure out how to coalesce leadership across sectors to lift each other up across sectors. The other thing I will say is in a number of these other communities, they have key flagship organizations that are far better organized than we have been at being able to cultivate leadership and specifically to build the pipeline of candidates and to lift up networks of elected officials. And actually, we've all talked about this, Madalene, Maeley, John, others, about how does the API community, how can we think about branding an organization like APAC in the Jewish community, or NALEJO, which is the national network of Latino elected officials that cultivate candidates and local and state Latino officials around the country. In California, we have an organization that some of our mutual friends have moved forward on, the APA Leadership Project, that has developed a candidate training program and every year coalesces API elected officials, usually with John Chiang as a keynote speaker, to really just come together. And this is a network that has helped to recruit school board candidates, city council candidates, and then state legislative candidates, and now statewide candidates. And this is something we've been doing in California that we have wondered is if this is a model that would be helpful in other parts of the country. We've seen it work in other communities. We haven't yet done it in ours. And that's something I really, if there's one thing that those of you who are listening take away, I hope that we can all work together across the country to think about coming together in that way.
Yeah. And, David, You're absolutely right about this fragmentation. It's noticeable, no matter what topic you talk about among Asian Americans. And the program that I'm running on, the Committee 100 Asian American Career Ceilings, we've tried, right, to reach out. In fact, we aggressively recruit heads of all these different organizations, whether it's Ascend or LEAP or so forth, to be speakers and be involved with these things. And we're just going to keep at it until everybody really actually enjoys chatting with each other. But I think we need that across the board and also in the political arena, right? In order for us to, close the gap relative to how the other ethnic groups do, right? Any other comments before we go on to the next?
So I would say here with APAICS, we have long worked in recruitment of talent because we have a pipeline of fellows, interns who've gone through the congressional programs who then stay on to continue as staff. We have 75% retention rate of people who continue in public service. Fellows who go back home to their home states have gone on to run for office. And our leadership development program has a success rate of having individuals who've gone through our program and then become state legislators. So an example for Portland, Oregon, which is not a very diverse city, not a very diverse state. It has a growing AAPI population. They're going to have 5 Vietnamese Americans in the state legislature after this election. We take credit on some part in helping to provide them with what I like to say, demystifying the process and making government more accessible. Because what we're here to do is to make sure that people feel empowered to feel that they can run for office and that they have the necessary skill sets and the foundation to be able to do this and not make rookie mistakes, and to provide them with a network of Asian American political consultants who are more than happy to answer their questions free of charge pro bono at these trainings, to be able to help them get themselves geared up to write a campaign plan and to go through the process of understanding how to create a digital strategy, a communications plan, a fundraising plan. I spent 16 years as a political consultant with my own firm, electing a lot of our API and Latino members of Congress. Congressman Hondo was one of my clients for 10 plus years. We spent a lot of time doing meet and greets for folks who were interested in running for office. And at APAICS, as a nonpartisan organization, we're happy to make sure that the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander community feels empowered to do that. And so the programs that we have, the last 2 years, we've had these programs called APAICS in Conversation across public service throughout the Asian American community, high-level public servants, to explain how their career trajectories have gotten them to this point in their professional development. So there's a lot in terms of depth when it comes to opportunities for Asian Americans to see themselves in roles, whether it's at a local level or at a federal level, in the judiciary. And so I think there's so many different ways for people to access this as a resource, and that's what APAICS serves. But, as I work with my counterparts in the Latino and Black communities in this process, they are decades ahead of us. And that is, something in terms of trying to create parity, or at the very minimum to be competitive in these various industries. We're also decades behind and not being able to, not having done the work. And so this is a part of catching up and making sure that, we are educating and making our community feel that they have the skills and the resources to be able to enter any of these fields.
Although I have to commend, a number of you, Maeley, for the work you did in California, and Madeline for the work you do for really, having an impact. And, but, as Madeline, you say, there's still a gap, right? And so even though a number of organizations like yours are doing great things in terms of being able to educate people, promote people, et cetera, I think we need to do more, and more on a broader basis, right? Because it seems like for example, maybe your programs, they ought to be nationwide. The things you started in California, right? They shouldn't. It should be across the board.
Well, actually, I have to tell you, when I started it was in the 70s. Probably some of these people were not even born yet when I started those training programs. But now with APAICS and with APLF and so many organizations having their own training all around the states. I think it is happening. And I found that community organizations, nonprofit community organizations, are also conducting leadership and training programs during their national conferences. So the training, and again with APAICS, and we have a great person in California, Annie Lam, who has put together some amazing training programs, not only for elected officials, but also for staff to help elevate them into key chief, more influential positions, whether it be in the private sector and the public sector. I did want to add one more item to what we can learn from other ethnics, and I'm going to ask John to help me with this. I think we can learn a lot with the Jewish community in terms of their numbers and in terms of their income level. They have been so successful in the political arena. They're disciplined. They are effective in terms of influence. When they speak, people listen. And I think it's because they understand the value of contributing to candidates and to campaigns so that they get representatives who truly will tout their agenda. Right. And I know John has a close affinity with the Jewish community, and I don't know if you want to add to that, John, of what we could learn from the Jewish community.
So I wanted to address another point before I get to Maeley, what you're inquiring about. Madeline was talking about education and political candidates. That's critical, but we have to educate our community. Now, Maeley's daughter, Stephanie, was disseminating the Pew research that just came out. I was reading on LinkedIn, somebody saying, hey, thank you to Stephanie Tom for posting this information. A large swath of the Asian American community doesn't identify as Asian, right? So, part of that is, how do we get, like the Chloe Kim, the Olympic athlete, was talking about how she had to face people at the top of the hill when she was starting to ski, and just prove her worth as an individual, people questioning her as an American. She goes, I don't know any other country, right? We need a concentrated effort. So even though you may have people of various ethnicities within the family, who don't have that natural relationship on an individual level, we have to have them understand that we are being impacted by others who view us with the same perception to our detriment. And so part of that is, how do we isolate that issue, to answer Maeley's question? So when you have AIPAC and the existential risk to the Jewish community in the state of Israel, what they're doing, what they had with, the terrible horrors with the genocide, where we don't have that same emotional impact. We have some really compelling stories, right? But we have to make sure that people, through individual connections, through building an understanding. I have a friend, the father of 4 of my 9 godchildren, who's been asked to work on an Asian American cable channel programming, right? So one of the things that we're trying to figure out now is, how do you capture the Asian American experience, right? Is this simply straight great content like, Squid Games, of what a lot of the Koreans are doing with their programming? Or how do we wrap in specific understandings on isolated community? Right. And so part of that would involve a larger discussion among the community groups and others. And hopefully that's a way to help build identity as to some of these larger issues, galvanizing a significant number of folks, so that hopefully it translates into larger action in the private sector, in the public sector, in the nonprofit sector.
By the way, I'm going to remind the audience that if you have any questions that you would like to pose to the panelists, please just type them into the chat box or the Q&A box, so that, and then we'll be able to see them. By the way, one thing I just want to mention is that one of the things that the Committee 100 Asian American Career Ceilings program decided to do, based on some ideas that came out last year in July, when we got a bunch of people together to try to come up with ideas on how we could do better. Everybody said, well, we don't have a common events calendar. We don't have a common directory. We don't have a common place where people can share ideas. So what we've done, and what I'm going to do is, for everyone who's attended and the panelists, I'll send you the link to a social media information sharing site that was created that we created, which is based on a Discord, social media technology, and it has an events calendar and a shared events calendar. It has a directory of about 60 organizations that are focused somehow related to the Asian American experience. But then there are various discussion groups, and you can post articles that you think people are interested in, and they have different categories, including this political category where there are discussion groups. So I'd encourage all of you to at least take a look. And it came out of beta 2 or 3 months ago, and we have active things going on. We even have a job posting segment where you can post jobs, and people have been vigorously posting jobs. So I would just go in, but again, it's part of this idea that try to coalesce people, right, by creating a common events calendar directory and a place where people can share ideas. So I encourage the panelists to contribute to it, and those of you who are in the audience, you'll all get a link to it so that you can at least test it out. There we have a question here. Here we go. Let's see. Is there a question here from someone? No, there we go. Okay, no, I don't. See. No, oh, they're just comments, okay. So I think the last thing, because we are now almost at the end of the hour, and we try to start on time and end on time. I guess I'm going to ask each of the 4 panelists in a couple sentences, say, what advice would you give to the audience, which, by the way, much of this audience are younger people. This is not a bunch of older people like us. It's a lot of millennials, Z, so forth. What advice would you give them to become involved politically and to be successful? So if each of you, it could be a word, it could be 2 sentences, what advice would you like to give them? So we'll start. David, David Chiang, you want to start? John Chiang, you want to start? You're muted. There we go.
As they say, be the change you want to see. Just on everything. I remember during COVID, I watched a lot of Brookings Institute panels in my board meetings. What really still offends me is seeing a poll where Asians aren't in. They didn't segment Asian Americans. So I used to ask at the end of these sessions, it's like, did you poll the Asians, right? How could you leave a significant community outside of that? And then I would credit those who actually included them, and I would ask them a question: can you elaborate on more? And then same thing for some of the corporate boards I'm on, and nonprofit organizations. What are you doing in regards to funding for the Asian American community? We covered the others, but I don't see a specific plan. And so the plan's the first step, but you need, right? This happens a lot in government and business. You have a plan if government takes any action, but there's no specific projects, and then there's no execution. And so, right, the Asians aren't even included in the planning stages. So, right, planning would be great, but project and execution are critical for the future for Asian Americans' inclusiveness in the American democracy.
Good advice. David, your advice to these aspiring political leaders in the audience?
I think I would, going on a variation of what John just said, think about what role do you want to play in our movement. There are many roles. There's certainly a role for folks, and I would encourage any of you who are interested in running for office. All of us who've run for office, there was a time when we never thought we would be elected to office. So you will go through that transition, but just know it literally is that old adage about taking that first step. But I would say, the roles of the Maeley Toms of the world and the Madalenes of the world are so critical and even potentially more important than the roles of electeds, and as far as putting together the infrastructure, framing the issues, really helping to build the movement. We need movement leaders at every role, and there are many roles, and there's likely one that fits you. And so my only ask is just think about what you're going to do and decide to do it.
Very good point, David. The definition of political activity is not just being the candidate. That's basically it, right? There are many important roles. So Madeline, your advice to our audience?
Thank you for this opportunity. I think, with APAICS especially, we have so many different programs for different entry points. High school students, so we run a high school program to help our youth better understand how public policy works. We bring them to DC. We give them a chance to meet different stakeholders who look like us, because they play roles in creating public policy. So whether they're as staff, or if they're someone who works in government affairs and someone who works in advocacy, those types of people are all out there working, doing this work. And to be seen doing the work is so important for people who feel like they don't have enough of us, as role models or as visible people, as active citizens, and especially our underrepresented communities. So Native Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders, Southeast Asians, Hmong, Lao, all of our communities who are seen as the most vulnerable, they also have the opportunity to be in public service. And so all of our cohorts, we specifically look very intentionally about how do our cohorts come from different parts of the country, not from just from the coast. If they're coming from our territories, coming from Hawaii, the Midwest, the South, that is all important to us because Asian Americans are everywhere. And so to be able to have diverse cohorts is important to us. And so we have different entry points through all of our programs. So many of our programs are meant to be accessible for those who are a socioeconomic status that doesn't afford them that opportunity. We pay for our congressional interns housing. So when you come to DC to run through an 8 to 10 week program into DC, and we know how expensive housing can be, we pay for that. So we don't want economic barriers to be the challenges to which our community cannot participate. And so we do the work to be able to provide those resources. So when people think of them to apply to our programs.
So your advice is become aware of and get involved with your programs of your organization. And by the way, Madeline, I absolutely expect you to post events and opportunities on the Discord site. And if you don't, I'm going to come after you, right?
Please send me the link. My communications team will be more than happy.
Yeah,
to
and have them post every week, have them post whatever new events or opportunities there are. Believe me, it'll be welcome. And so Maeley, as is appropriate, you're going to have the last word.
I get to close. I have two examples here of role models who did what I am going to say should be done. You have to be very clear why you are running. And John, I am so in awe of John Chiang because when he decided to run for governor, he had a safe state treasurer seat to stay in. But he was tired of seeing Asian Americans just seated at the table. John's vision when he ran for governor, that it was time for Asian candidates to be at the head of the table. So he had a clear vision of what he wanted to do. David Chiu had a clear vision what he wanted to do as state legislature. He learned and understood the state process, but what he wanted to do is to go back to San Francisco and represent San Francisco. These are clear visions of these two role models of how they pursued their career and why they are so respected. And I just consider them among two of our top role models. Secondly, do not allow yourself to be limited to be defined as an Asian American candidate. You're running because you're the best candidate for that position. You're the best representative for that district or for whatever responsibility or for whatever goal of the office you're running for. So don't let people define you and don't let people limit you. And thirdly, understand that your private life is going to be an open book. There's going to be some family sacrifices, But if you have that passion and commitment to want to make a difference for your community, then it's worth making those sacrifices. And also, I want to encourage people to think of appointments. That's another way to get politically engaged and politically involved, and to have, leadership positions in government. But definitely, I salute the two role models who have defined what they wanted to do with their political careers and defining themselves as just the best candidates for the position.
Well, we couldn't have a better ending comment than what Maeley said. So with that, first of all, I want to thank the 4 panelists. This has been a wonderful event, some very good thoughts, and a very diverse group. So that's very, very good for the audience to hear from different perspectives. I want to thank the audience for attending, and just want to remind you that if you want to binge watch this, we're recording it. If you want to play it over and over again, I know John, because you have 8, godchildren, you're going to make it required watching. You're going to tell them you got to, 9. Oh, okay, 9. There's probably another story as to how the hell you end up with 9 godchildren, but we'll save that for another time. But we'll send, once the video has been, uploaded, so we'll let everyone who registered and everyone who attended know where the link is. And the last is, please save the date for November 1 at 8 o'clock for the fireside chat with Andrew Yang, who will really talk about, the challenges and opportunities for Asian Americans running for office. So thank you all. And again, thank you so much for the 4 of you. You did a terrific job.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for being a moderator.
Thanks, guys.